I'm going to see how everyone reacts. I'm going to ascertain what friendship is all about. With a nod of my own, I opened my mouth and began to explain.
ひなみ沢には、ある特別な病気があるのです。その病気の名前は、仮なのか正式なのかわかりませんですが、ひなみ沢症候群と呼ばれていますです。
Everyone glanced back and forth at each other when I mentioned the term. They'd never heard of it before. The name Hinamizawa syndrome has actually been around since before the war. It's the general term for the severe homesickness and mental instability that people from Hinamizawa experience when outside of the village. People in Hinamizawa have refused to leave the village since the era of Onigafuchi. The villagers believed that they'd be cursed by Oishiro-sama if they left, and people who did often came back because of that curse. In general, it used to be thought of as only severe homesickness. But during the war, soldiers from Hinamizawa became mentally deranged in faraway places. That does sometimes happen in war. What was unique about the soldiers from Hinamizawa was the way that they killed their own comrades and committed suicide at the end. One doctor became curious about these cases and studied those soldiers. That's when they found out that it was actually a disease only found in Hinamizawa. According to this doctor, their strange behavior was not the result of their culture. It was a mental disease triggered by external circumstances. A mental disease with an external cause is different from a psychological illness. It's the result of some kind of physical disorder, and it causes people to become mentally unstable when something triggers it. There are 3 categories of externally caused mental diseases: traumatically induced, substance abuse induced, and chemical imbalance induced. Traumatically induced disorders are cases resulting from damage to the brain, from trauma or infection that influences the mind. This is the reason personalities can change as a result of head injuries. Substance abuse, as the name suggests, refers to cases where drugs, especially alcohol or stimulants, have influenced the mind. The last category is chemical imbalances. These are cases where some ailment in the patient's body causes abnormal secretions of bodily chemicals, which then influences the brain functions. This may sound odd, but it's been said that people tend to become depressed when they have a cold. We've all experienced the ways in which physical sickness can cause a buildup of negative emotions. However, with chemical imbalances, the cause is more direct. People's emotions aren't born from our hearts. Everyone should know, logically, that the result of chemicals secreted by the organs in our body is necessary. So when the organs operating the secretion of those emotional controllers malfunction, it causes them to secrete abnormal amounts. The thyroid gland, for example, secretes hormones that regulate emotions. When that gland is defective, the balance of those hormones becomes unstable. This can cause people to have not only a physical sickness, but also a mental sickness such as depression. People don't get mentally ill just because of mental problems. Human beings are made out of meat. We get mentally ill when that meat is defective. Meaty humans. The doctor studying Hinamizawa syndrome also came up with a theory. He suggested that there's a pathogen endemic to Hinamizawa that, if its host stray too far from home, affects the chemicals in their brain and causes them to hallucinate. The villagers' belief in Oishiro-sama is certainly related to this endemic disease. People in Onigafuchi village knew about this syndrome. They knew that they couldn't survive outside the village. They also didn't want anyone else to enter the village, because they would get infected too. They took this disease as a curse, not a sickness. The most significant symptoms of this disease are antisocial behavior and an extreme persecution complex. The eventual suicide caused by defects in the lymph nodes are also another unique characteristic. The unusual behavior of terminal patients is what inspired the legend of the demons coming out of the swamp and attacking the villagers. Basically, sick villagers developed severe persecution complexes and wound up killing other villagers. After a long time, survivors of the disease started to comprehend its rules. They discovered that the disease is incurable once you contract it. That's why they started barring outsiders from entering the village. Also, once you become ill, you'll begin developing a persecution complex. This can happen to anyone in the village. The doctrine of Oyashiro-sama says that the blood of humans and demons was mixed together, and that Oyashiro-sama has control over the violent blood of the demons. People said that you'd be cursed if you didn't follow Oyashiro-sama's rules. That could also be understood to mean that as long as you followed Oyashiro-sama's rules, you could cope with this endemic disease. This is what was meant by the scripture in Oyashiro-sama's legend that said they appeared, unified the humans and demons, and made them live together in this village. Then there was the most important part. The rules to prevent symptoms from appearing. Those rules are the taboos, and people were strictly taught that Oyashiro-sama would curse them if they broke those rules. The horrible bloody traditions of the village were probably performed in order to force people to respect those taboos. There are several ways to keep the disease under control, but there are two main conditions for doing so. The first one is to prevent suspicion. When the villagers are suspicious of someone, it can trigger their persecution complex, which can lead to them developing terminal symptoms. That's why they made sure to have such a tightly knit community, so that people wouldn't suspect each other. Since the terror of Oyashiro-sama's curse is emphasized, many don't know this, but she's also a god of marriage and neighborly love. However, this condition is not as important as the other one. Indeed, Oyashiro-sama isn't even recognized as a god of friendship in Hinamizawa anymore, and is only worshipped as such in Okinamiya's Hirosaka district. Now, for the other condition. This one is much clearer, and was practiced more strictly. If villagers leave Hinamizawa, they will fall ill quickly, proportional to the distance from the village. Villagers nowadays will not get sick as rapidly, even if they leave town or even go out of the country for a long time. However, long ago, they would fall ill as soon as they left the village. It's very unfortunate that Keiichi got infected so soon after he moved to the village. It was also very unfortunate that he got sick, just because he left the village for a few days to go to his relative's funeral in that one world. That's why Hanyu felt so bad for him at the time, and kept apologizing over and over. Although no matter how much she apologized, he never heard her voice. This turned into a long discussion, but these rules etched around Oyashiro-sama's curse represent the ancient wisdom of how to cope with the Hinamizawa syndrome. Is there any way to use this mental disease for military purposes? The aforementioned doctor insisted there was, but the military didn't listen to him at all at the time. They were interested in developing a weapon that can make a dramatic change to the war efforts. They didn't have any money to spare for the research of the strange disease. In this way, research on Hinamizawa syndrome was abandoned. Then, when the war ended, Japan started its reconstruction under American leadership. However, some powerful people in the political world didn't want to accept the American way of thinking. Some of them were fired by the GHQ, but they still stayed on as advisors to the government, since Japan is a culture of respecting the elderly. Eventually, a political organization was formed, the object of which was to restore Japan to the way it was before the war. In the beginning, this organization was a very small group. It was just a gathering of 2 or 3 individuals who shared the same ideals, blowing hot air at a restaurant. The 2 or 3 hit it off with each other and grew it to the size of a class reunion. That group became a rather sizable organization, eventually becoming a political one. Well, it would be more accurate to call them a secret society. This secret society eventually came to be called by the name of the place where it was based, Tokyo. There are many mysteries about Tokyo. One thing I knew for sure is that it was composed of old men from Japan's political stage, ones with strong power to indirectly influence the government in vast assets that meant they could work from the shadows. They were also connected to various corporations, and their goal was to return Japan to the way it was before the war. Of course, that was a pretty ridiculous goal. It was nothing more than an idea in the minds immediately after war, back when they were still bowing their heads to the occupation forces of those white barbarians. Once Japan's post-war reconstruction began, Tokyo steadily became a shell of its former self. But it didn't totally become a shell. It culled the fat. Japan regained its peace. And years passed. However, some people still continued to believe that Japan had been better before the war, and they were determined to return the country to those times. So this Tokyo plotted how to restore pre-war Japan from many angles. They approached the problem economically, internationally, and militarily as well. Japan had no nuclear armaments due to the 3 non-nuclear principles. In other words, this country has to brown-nose America as long as they hold nuclear weapons. The number 1 priority of Tokyo is to be independent from America. They want this country to be on equal footing, and to obtain a weapon of mass destruction that isn't nuclear in nature. That was the reason why they started thinking about utilizing Hinamizawa syndrome. However, they couldn't study this disease openly. In order to utilize it for military purposes, they had to hide the existence of the disease itself. So they enlisted one young researcher, Kiyosuke Irie. I needed to make it clear that Irie isn't some far-right supporter. Hold on. Sorry, I just got a phone call. Anyway, I needed to make it clear that Irie isn't some far-right supporter of the secret society. He's just a young, capable doctor and an earnest researcher. He published an innovative thesis, but other academics thought he was too radical. However, that convinced Tokyo that he was the only researcher suitable to study Hinamizawa syndrome. As someone young and ambitious, Irie was thrilled to take on the project of studying this rare disease with a large budget, a large staff, and his own facility. But researching the disease would mean that he'd end up infected too. No one would want to take on such dangerous research. He really was too young, with his other option being wearing down his youth working hard at the night shift for a local practice. He wanted to answer the expectations of the sponsor who carefully selected him. In the end, Irie was able to uncover that, as hypothesized, the Hinamizawa syndrome was a unique infectious disease, and he developed both a treatment and a vaccine. Irie was extremely talented. The Irie Institute was formed to study the disease. Irie was nominally the head of the organization, but Tokyo still sent out a supervisor, because when all was said and done, he was just a researcher. That supervisor was Mio Takano. Takano's job at the Institute was to act as a go-between for Tokyo and Irie, manage the research progress, and preserve its secrecy. The latter was the most important part of her job. She had to do her best to prevent people from finding out that Irie was researching the disease, or even that the disease exists at all. The Mountain Dogs were formed for that purpose. They were under Takano's command, and their job is to prevent the Institute's secrets from being discovered. The Mountain Dogs are one special force unit specializing in unconventional warfare, and owned by Tokyo with its vast influence on the SDF. Tokyo had set their eyes on the likelihood that a small elite squad of covert operatives would be a trump card in the anti-nuke era. So they vigorously investigated those options. This was a worldwide trend. Since the Cold War, everyone avoided sending troops directly to their enemy's doorstep. Japan was also trying to be a part of that world. As a result, by 1983, even the police had been forming secret special forces units. Prefectural Police Squad 2, the ones who intervened when Rena laid siege to her school, changed their name to Zero Company and grew into an anti-terrorism squad that handled hijackings around the Kansai airport area. The National Police Agency Squad 6 was formed as a counterterrorism squad for Narita Airport 2, and they later changed their name to 7th Company as well. They theorized that in a world where nations possess nukes that they can't use, small elite special forces disrupting metropolitan areas would be the new way of waging war. So in 1977, they developed the SAT's predecessor, the Special Task Force SAP, to serve as the National Police Agency's trump card in securing the peace. Likewise, the Japan's Coast Guard established their Special Task Force, the SST, in anticipation of unconventional warfare on the coast. There are several known Special Force units in Japan. When they hear a phrase like Special Forces, most people tend to think of a movie or a comic book. However, these units actually exist, and are protecting Japan in secret. During the famous incident of suspicious boats off the coast of Noto Peninsula, the news reported that the boats sank before the helicopter squad trained in gun battles. Sorry, that was weird. So the squad was recalled, but that was because the Coast Guard's SST acted. However, the news never mentions the SST or any other Special Forces unit. All of these units were established after Tokyo made a suggestion about it to the government. Researching military tactics under the name of peace and order worked perfectly for Tokyo. But since the mid-century anti-war movement made people resent those forces, these special units have been kept secret as of 1983. Furthermore, these units are not all formed under the jurisdiction of the police. There are still many other military units that are kept secret from the average citizen. The Mountain Dogs are actually one of those special units. They specialize in kidnapping, espionage, and preserving secrecy. You might as well call them an assassination unit. They were around during the dam conflict as well. Tokyo worked to put an end to the dam project because of the impact it would have on Irie's research. The Mountain Dogs were the ones who kidnapped the Minister of Construction's grandson. Most people believe that the Sonozaki family was at the center of the movement, but in reality, the Mountain Dogs were responsible for many of the things the Sonozakis were accused of. In that sense, the existence of the Sonozaki family was an advantage to the dogs. Their main job after the dam conflict ended had been to continue keeping the disease hidden from the public. With the spread of information networks in the modern age, the media jumped onto any unusual incident and quickly aired it to the whole nation. Tokyo doesn't want the disease to be known nationwide, since they're trying to utilize it for their own purposes. The main task of the mountain dogs is to kidnap people suffering from Hinamizawa syndrome. They pose as gardeners, but in actuality they patrol the village to make sure nothing strange happens. They're the ones who demon away people who go missing. They're probably also involved in some of the mysterious deaths too. The last important person is Jiro Tomitake. I don't know his real name. He was an auditor who was sent from Tokyo 4 times a year. He came to check on the progress of the research and outline requests from Tokyo. He discussed the research budget with Irie too. He also got the observation report on Irie from Takano. That was his purpose. Irie started out by studying the autopsy reports of dead villagers, and he discovered many answers from that. In 1979, the Mountain Dogs kidnapped the culprit behind the murder of the construction chief, who was a terminal patient of Hinamizawa syndrome. The nature of the disease was dramatically clarified. Their research made rapid progress after that, and they discovered a vaccine, medication, and other methods of treatment for the disease. At the same time, they continued to investigate how to utilize it for military purposes. One of the interesting findings of the research was that the pathogen can only be found when the patient is still alive. On top of that, they couldn't detect the presence of the pathogen at all, unless they used a certain inhumane method. In other words, it's virtually impossible to detect the pathogen by normal means. It left almost no trace, and the usual symptoms it produced seemed like voluntary behavior, so they concluded that the disease could be used to their advantage. However, Tokyo has been going through some changes. It's been almost 50 years since the war ended. The leaders and shadows behind Japan's government who ruled from the center of Tokyo began growing infirm and opening up seats, steadily passing their leadership to the new generation. The whole organization has started to shift. Of course, the purpose of Tokyo has stayed the same. It's still a secret society of ultra-nationalists who want Japan to be at top of the world. However, their ambition to start a war with America and take over the world has diminished. Tokyo has directed its priorities towards the economy, international affairs, and education. That doesn't mean that those ambitions are gone entirely, however. Several seniors still alive retain those ambitions. Tokyo continues to finance military research. But for the present-day Tokyo, Irie's research is actually something of an embarrassment. The new Tokyo is no longer interested in his project, and they announced that they're going to cut their budget as soon as those seniors pass away. However, Irie objected to that plan. He strongly appealed for the continuation of his research. This is what Okonagi was talking about. Irie is in disagreement with Tokyo. Irie's research has been making great progress. They've discovered various treatment and testing methods, and he's even started to develop a treatment plan for the whole village. If they cut his funding, Irie's research would end without any results. Tokyo had a discussion with Irie through Tomitake, and they decided to shut down his research partially, but not fully. However, they told him to immediately stop researching military applications of the disease, and destroy all the research data related to that. He had little interest in weaponizing the disease anyway, so Irie accepted those terms right away. Tokyo probably believed that it was better to let him find a cure for the disease than to terminate the project entirely. At this point, Irie considers himself one of the villagers. Perhaps exterminating the disease infecting the villagers without their knowledge is his way of atoning for using the village to advance his research and reputation. Both Tokyo and Irie agreed to fully terminate his research as soon as he discovered a way to completely eradicate the Hinamizawa syndrome. Irie made a plan for the next 3 years, and he promised them that he would find a resolution by 1986 at the latest. Whoops. Sorry. Phone noises. The meeting they had this June was to discuss the plan and budget for the next 3 years. Which brings us back to the beginning. One theory goes that Irie is in opposition with Tokyo, and as his trump card, he's planning to kill Rika Furude. The other theory is that Takano killed Tomitake, and as her trump card, she's going to kill Rika Furude. I suppose I need to explain why Rika Furude can be a trump card. The answer to that lies in the ancient traditions of Hinamizawa. Supposedly, members of Furude family have the blood of Oyashiro-sama in their veins. I explained earlier that Oyashiro-sama was made up as a method for having people cope with the disease. However, that's actually not true. For the demons, the pathogens, to survive, a certain being must be present. That being is the successor of the Furude family line. The truth behind the advent of Oyashiro-sama and the coexistence of humans and demons is that Oyashiro-sama was actually the queen of the village. According to Irie's research, Rika is adored by the whole village, not only because she's a charming little girl, but because she's the queen's carrier. Infected patients are unconsciously driven to protect their queen. Irie says that this is done with pheromones. Rika Furude's mother was also adored by everyone since she was little. However, as soon as she gave birth, people's attention quickly shifted to Rika. Irie calls it the succession of the throne. The queen is a precious existence to the people in this village. There are theories that carriers of the disease are actually unable to survive when away from the queen, not from the village itself. Irie's research indicates that the queen can only survive in Hinamizawa, and infected patients can only stay alive when they're around her. But this is just a theory. Surprisingly, however, the doctor who first discovered the syndrome was also aware of the existence of the queen. That doctor was also knowledgeable about Hinamizawa's culture, and he was interested in how much value the village placed in the Furude family. He theorized that the queen lying in the Furude bloodline might have the power to manipulate the whole village. The truth is still unknown, but perhaps the Furude family really has held such power since ancient times. Miraculous power that would make them perfect for serving in the priesthood. Although the only thing Rika can do is be doted upon by the villagers. If all this is true, then the question is what would happen if the queen disappeared from the village? During the war, a doctor prophesied that if the queen were to die, then all the infected would show terminal symptoms, and the whole village would be wiped out. He advocated for strict preservation of the queen's host. Rika is important to Tokyo not only because Irie found out many answers after running tests on her body. If Rika Furude dies, the 2,000 people in Hinamizawa will turn into demons. It would happen too fast for people to even realize that they're getting sick. They will each be overcome with a violent persecution complex and start killing each other out of fear. This is why the mountain dogs are protecting the queen, Rika Furude. Her death spells the end of the whole village. That's why Rika Furude is the trump card for those who know she's the center of the whole epidemic. This is the story of Hinamizawa. Our tale begins in June 1983. Tokyo's liaison, Tomitake, was found dead of the disease, even though he was vaccinated against it. On the same night, Takano was also kidnapped and murdered. Though I don't know for sure if she's really dead or not. Rika Furude is also going to be murdered soon enough. While I've suspected Irie and Takano, this is my first time doubting Tokyo. I always thought that they were on my side. They had to be. My death would lead to nothing but disaster. At the same time, there might be people within Tokyo who could use my death as a trump card. I never considered that they were opposing factions within Tokyo. I guess I was naive enough to not realize that Tokyo had internal problems due to the generation gap. Anyway, I wouldn't be feeling this way if I didn't suspect that Takano might still be alive. I feel like I'm starting to see the greater picture. It's possible too that Takano is the victim, and Irie is the bad guy. The mountain dogs might be on my side, or they might be assassins who are trying to kill me. I was too scared to choose a wine that might be at risk of having something poisonous mixed in. In which case, I could rest assured of the fresh unopened bottle, even if it was a little bad. After telling everything to my friends, I finally realized that I could only trust them and the police. I'm really dumb. I thought I was thinking so hard, but I never actually understood anything. After all this time, I made things clear just by talking about them with my friends. I'd never have thought it would make such a big difference.